Let's try to figure out how to build some resilience, right, in kids. It used to be that being resilient was just to say no, right? If you just say no, clearly you avoid all this stuff, right? And it's true, but then the question up for us as adults is how do we teach kids how to say no? And along those lines, it means what do we have to actively teach kids about? What are the things that are actually going to correlate as a strength that are going to help kids make good decisions, not only as they go through high school, but then also into adulthood? And so one of the questions we have to start with is asking this question of what is the purpose of being a parent? Because right now with our culture, it means a whole bunch of different things. Right now, our culture seems to take one of two tracks as far as the purpose of parenting. First track is to make sure that my kid looks as great as they can on paper the day they graduate high school, or to help raise them to be an adaptive and independent adult. The reality is you can't have it both ways. Because the thing of it is that for kids to grow up to be an adaptive and independent adult, they're going to have to struggle. They're going to have some hard times. And it's our job as parents to help them through those hard times. But if they're having hard times, the odds are they're probably not going to do as well as they would like in a certain area in school, whether it's academics, athletics, socially, whatever the case is, there might be some hardship. But if our goal as a parent is to say, you know what, I want my kid to look as great as they can on paper the day they graduate high school, we're going to eliminate the hardship. We're going to get rid of anything difficult, anything challenging that's going to get in their way, because we want to make sure that when that graduation day comes, they are set for their future. But the problem is we haven't allowed them to practice how to deal with hardships at all. And without allowing them how to practice how to deal with hardships, all we're doing is setting them up to get into all the things that the speakers before me had talked about, because they won't know how to deal with the negative emotions. So they don't know how to deal with the negative emotions, and let's just go numb ourselves into all the different things that are going on. I've been practicing in Naperville now for 15 plus years, and there's been a prescription drug substance abuse problem for a long time. Kids are numbing themselves, and we're not giving them an opportunity to feel the negative things, cope with it, and manage it effectively. So as a parent, we have to decide what our strategy is. Are we trying to help them look as good as they can on paper when they graduate high school, or do we want them to be an adaptive and independent adult? So what goes behind that now are a couple of points. First is that we have to understand that our culture has changed, right? Delayed gratification, through a whole bunch of research, says it's an essential part of being successful, but our culture doesn't function this way. Our culture actually has migrated more into an instant gratification culture. I mean, think about it. If let's say 4 years ago or so, 5 years ago, if you were going to order a package to your house, it would take 4 weeks? Now we get mad if it doesn't get there tomorrow, right? We got tomorrow. Can I get it today? Where can I go pick it up in an hour, right? This is what's happened culturally. Technology has been great, right? I mean, being able, 15 years ago, definitely 20 years ago, everyone here would not have a cell phone on them, right? Being able to communicate quickly, easily, expect things to happen quickly and easily, that's been transformative within our culture. And it's made things really convenient. But what it's also done is changed our perspective of what we think we should expect day to day. We expect things to go quickly and easily, so we don't expect to feel bad. So this instant gratification culture underlies part of the problem, because that's where we think, well, if my kid looks as great as they can on paper when they graduate high school, clearly they're going to be set up for a perfect life and a perfect future. And if they don't look good on paper, well, then clearly they're a catastrophic failure. It's kind of one or the other. We don't allow for a middle ground anymore. So this instant gratification culture just continues to feed that mentality, which then goes to the second part of that. We have anxiety being this terrible thing. It's a demonized word. Anxiety is not bad. I've talked to thousands of parents. I have not met one adult who lives a completely worry-free, stress-free, blissful life, and I'm willing to bet it's no adult in this room either. It doesn't exist. But it's exactly the world that we're preparing our kids to live in. So we get very surprised as parents when we hear that our kids can't cope with anxiety. Well, what a surprise. We're not really teaching them, because we're not giving them the time to help them really learn how to deal with negative emotions. Most adults would say emotional intelligence is essential for personal and professional success. But as adults, when we think about emotional intelligence, we're very comfortable with our kids experiencing emotions like happiness or excitement. We want our kids to theoretically understand shame, guilt, embarrassment, disappointment, fear. We don't want them to feel it. We just want them to get it. But we can't have it both ways. Either emotional intelligence is important, in which case it's incumbent on us as adults to teach all of the emotions, not just the feel-good ones, or we allow them to just be shielded from all the negatives, but then not be prepared for the future. So we have to understand those two components as far as instant gratification culture and the demonizing of anxiety in general. Now, again, I'm a clinician. I know there's anxiety disorders, but we can't say that something that literally every adult experiences is clinically significant. We all experience it. It's how we cope with it, and being exposed to it often allows us to then be able to better manage it. But if we don't get the practice, it's really hard as a young person to grow up and then be able to handle those emotions. So what are things that do help? You know, there have been studies that have been done that talk about traits of high-performing leaders. Because I do believe that leadership traits are the traits that are really going to help build resilience in young people, especially, again, as they get older. So first trait that I want to talk about is adaptability. Leaders who were identified as having this trait were more than 7 times as likely to be labeled as high-performing as those who didn't. And it is what it sounds like, adaptability. How well can you adapt to a given circumstance? Now let's think about our culture for a minute. For the adults in the room, when we were growing up and we went to school and we forgot our lunch, what do we do? Right? Like maybe you bummed $1 off of a kid, had a stale slice of pizza, and moved on with your day, right? Like that was kind of what you did. No one knew. There wasn't like a 5-alarm fire. And we're all here, right? We're all living. We all went and did our things. It was a non-event. Today, this is not the case, right? I did a lot of work over at Neuqua Valley High School over the years, and I talked with Principal McBride when he was there, and he was talking about the number of parents that were bringing in lunches and forgotten Chromebooks and all those things every day. And he said, forget the learning component of it all. He said, logistically, we're not a warehouse. We can't handle 90 lunches a day, 50 Chromebooks. He said, this is ridiculous. But we're not allowing our kids to learn how to adapt. We're focused as parents to make sure our kids' lives and days go as smooth as possible, as easy as possible, so they can look as good as they can on paper the day they graduate high school. We're not focused on them forgetting their lunch, forgetting their homework, and learning how to negotiate whatever that difficult situation might be. It's a small example, but if you do it repetitively enough, you start to learn how to adapt. If we're getting focused as parents on making things go so well for our kids all the time, they're not learning how to adapt. What they're actually learning is how to expect things to be perfect for them, which isn't going to bode well for them in the long term. Because again, I don't know an adult where everything has gone according to plan all the time. It doesn't work that way. So we have to understand what the world is, and what does adulthood have ahead of our kids, and how are we going to prepare them for the world that's coming, not make it as easy as possible for them now. We've got to align our parenting and create that strategy effectively. The next one is the velocity of decision-making. Leaders who are identified with this trait were more than 12 times as likely to be labeled as high-performing. And it's the velocity of decision-making. How quickly can one make a decision? Not how quickly can one make the right decision. We teach and value accuracy and precision in our culture. The number of times that we say to kids, make sure you think that through, slow down, right? Slow down, slow down, slow down, be right. If we have young kids as parents and we know, and we might see our kids maybe making the wrong decision when it comes to their friends or how they're going to handle a situation, we jump in and try to change their minds so we can avoid a negative situation. That doesn't help them learn how to make a decision. Kids have to be able and have some freedom to make some wrong decisions, because by making wrong decisions, they start to get a feel about what becomes the right ones. But if we're constantly valuing the right decision over and over and over again, it's really hard for them to feel confident making quick decisions. Because when you think about over the course of anyone's life, there's a lot of quick decisions that we have to make, especially when we're independent. And what the research did on these studies had shown was that indecision, and I've seen it clinically, indecision is way more paralyzing than bad decisions. Bad decisions, you can move forward and then adapt. You can learn, and by making decisions that are also quick and having practice making wrong ones, that's also where young people understand their value points. So if they have to make quick decisions in a moment, they've practiced how to reflect on value points, what's important to them, family, all these different things. And they can make quick decisions and keep moving forward, not get stuck, and not get paralyzed because they don't want to be wrong. And the last one is reliability. Leaders who are identified with this trait were more than 15 times as likely to be labeled as high performing. And reliability is defined as radical personal accountability, right? How much does one expect the best of themselves every day, regardless of the situation? And there's a few examples to that, right? Like, as a simple example, if a child forgets their homework assignment, right, and they text the parent and say, "Bring it to me," and the parent says no, which, by the way, you're allowed to say if a kid asks you to bring something that they forgot. Just because they can text you doesn't mean you have to say yes. It's okay to say no. But let's say you say no, and you pick your child up at the end of the day, and you're concerned about how they're going to act or how they're going to respond. A kid who's really internalized being reliable would get into the car and say, "I can't believe I forgot my homework." Not, "I can't believe you didn't bring it to me." There's a big difference. And so we really want kids to internalize the accountability. Because when we talk about all these choices and all these things that are floating out there that can be harmful for kids, it's about how are they going to hold themselves accountable and be confident in being able to do it. And they're not going, and it's unfair to expect kids to make these really difficult decisions, like Dr. Weiner's talking about at a party, where these things start coming out, if they haven't already been practicing about how to deal with these negative emotions in safer environments. If their first part of being exposed to these things is at a party and they've never been exposed to anxiety, the easiest way to get rid of feeling anxious is just to go along with what everyone else is doing. The easiest thing. If kids have practice about how to manage those negative emotions and manage the intensity of the feelings, and they've done it before, they can feel confident walking away. But we've got to give them the opportunity to practice. And reliability is one where even with young people, if you're, most parents have asked me, well, how do how do you develop this? The easiest example for me is thinking about in a household. Most times there's a kitchen and then there's a family room right next to it typically. And, most of the time there's a parent in the kitchen doing whatever they're doing, and there's a kid in the family room probably watching TV or doing what they're doing, right? And the number of times a kid will say, "Hey, can you get me something to drink?" Right? And so usually, a parent is it could be in front of the sink. The cups could be right here. It could actually be a very easy thing to do to just get the child something to drink. But reliability is at some point saying, if you're thirsty, why don't you go get it yourself? And it's amazing how often kids will not be thirsty anymore if they have to go get it themselves. Right? So I think it's the same thing. At some point when kids get older, how do we start with little everyday things, continue to push them to be held accountable for what they have to do? Another example is, things like Chromebooks, right? Most kids are getting these things in schools. In most houses, the charger is, let's say the charger is upstairs in a kid's room. So it's bedtime, and you have a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid who might be tired. They have to charge their Chromebook, and they left the Chromebook downstairs. The question is, who's going to go get it? Right? As a parent, the easiest way to avoid the conflict and everything else is just to go down and get it. Right? It saves a heck of a lot of hassle. It's bedtime, everyone's late, tired. Who wants to deal with all that? I'm just going to go deal with it, right? But again, if we're going to talk about embedding reliability, as a parent, how much do we keep fighting the fight of having the kid go get it? They can do it. Even at 8, 9 years old, they can do it. They just don't want to do it. And they know they can bend us because we don't want to have to deal with it. So there's a question when it comes to we're talking about building resilience in kids. At what point as parents do we say, we're working so hard to try to make things smooth for everybody, but just because things are smooth and easy doesn't mean anyone's gaining anything from it. The only thing anyone's ever gaining from it is the parent in the moment where it's just something that they don't have to deal with because there's 1,000 other stressors going on that we don't need an extra thing. But if we're talking long term, if the strategy is going to be how are we going to prepare our kids to be adaptive and independent adults, it's going to mean preparing them for the hardships that we all know are out there, because they're not going to eventually choose the difficulties that may come their way. Another thing that came up in research was things about conscientiousness. We talk about making sure that kids have a plan, right? Research says that conscientious people do very well when there's a path and a goal ahead of them. Right? If it's all clearly laid out, they do very, very well. And that's how we raise kids. I mean, I know the school systems talk about it a lot. What's your plan? What do you want to take? Let's plan it out, right? Conscientiousness is great. But research has also shown that When conscientious people suddenly find themselves unemployed, their happiness levels drop 120% relative to people who are not conscientious. So it's great to try to put out that plan, the goal, totally. But if we're not also talking about our kids about a plan B, what happens if this doesn't work, and what are you going to think, and how are you going to feel, and getting that mindset embedded too. Again, they're going to struggle because they're going to want things to always go smoothly. While it works well when things go well, it could be really catastrophic if it doesn't. So we've got to make sure that we're preparing for both. The other thing is challenges. Research says that we tend to do what's easiest over what makes us happiest, which is kind of interesting, right? We actually feel better and are happier when we're challenged and when we overcome a challenge, right? What was interesting is that when Pillsbury released in the 60s, they released their cake mix, right? Their ready-made cake mix. And they were like, this is great. Like, this is the easiest way to make a cake. We have this, the flour and everything in a bag. You just add water, bam, this is easy. And they found that their sales were terrible. And they were like, what is going on? We just made baking so much easier. No one's buying it. And what they found, and what they realized they didn't consider, was that baking is an act of caring. And people didn't feel like they were doing enough to show that they cared. So Pillsbury changed their recipe, where you had to add eggs and water. Now, all of a sudden, people felt like they were doing something, and their sales went up. Having that little bit of a challenge is important. Just because we want to remove every little challenge from what's going on with our kids doesn't mean it's going to be positively effective for them. And this last point, American culture has increasingly emphasized high expectations and following your dreams, things that feel good when you're young. However, the average mature adult has realized that their dreams might not be fulfilled unless happiness is the inevitable result. Mature adults in previous eras might not have expected so much, but expectations are now so high they can't be met. This is kind of the cultural tone that we're setting for our kids. When we continue to remove the hardships, and we're setting up the positive emotions constantly, there's really a belief system that exists that as long as you get the right grades, do the right thing, get into the right school, by the time you graduate college, you are going to be hitting a peak by the time you're 25, and you're going to stay there all the way till retirement. That's the expectation. And the problem is that that peak is not getting hit that early, and kids are having a hard time dealing with the struggle that goes along the way. Because the reality is more that you start peaking more when you're kind of in that 40 to 55 range, right? There's a lot of time. And because that instant gratification culture continues to hammer kids at expecting things to happen quickly and easily, they're just not prepared to deal with the hardship. So we've got to make sure that we're tempering that expectation for our kids and not setting them up for expectations that can't be met. So then just to wrap up, that stress and anxiety are a part of life. So our job as far as building resilience is not to eliminate stress and anxiety. Our job is to make sure that kids are being able to label what it feels like, and then we're coaching them through how to handle it, not eliminating the emotion. Because kids are going to be best served by the exposure to these emotions, not getting shielded from them. And the more we can be active in them being able to experience negative emotions, them being confident and being able to be successful in the face of these negative emotions, ultimately the more resilient they're going to be able to become. And then when they have to make the choices in the moment about do they engage in some of the things as far as marijuana, vaping, other negative choices and things that'll be in front of them, that they're going to have the confidence enough to do that. And again, success isn't going to be determined by what college or whatever they go to. The success ultimately is going to be determined by their motivation, their levels of initiative, their ability to make decisions and adapt effectively. And if you're curious about more, I wrote a book, Unwritten Rules. It's available on Amazon and sold at Anderson's about this topic. So we'll hear from a detective now. Thank you.